News broke yesterday that President Obama authorized airstrikes on jihadist ISIS militants in Iraq. I guess we can call them ISIS now. Everybody else is calling them ISIS. I always said ISIS. I guess I'll jump on the bandwagon and say ISIS. As somebody said on Twitter the other day, I think the reason I've been hesitant to call them that is because it really does sound so pretty. Like, it sounds like something you should name your daughter. Like, oh, have you met my daughters? This one is Crystal, and that's ISIS. Oh, how lovely. Well, no, they're actually beheading people, and they're assholes, and they're terrorists. So, let me explain what's happening here. Obama authorized airstrikes to go after these ISIS militants. And for those of you who haven't been following the news closely, these ISIS militants originally fought in Syria against the Assad regime, and I think a lot of them are still over there. And they're also fighting the FSA, which is like the more secular rebel group fighting Assad. And then they decided, well, fuck this, let's actually set up a caliphate, and they're marching towards Iraq, and they've been in Iraq, and they took a large Iraqi city named Mosul, and they've taken many, many towns. I believe it's over a dozen towns now that they've taken, and they've killed many moderate Sunnis and Shiites along the way. The Iraqi military basically ran away when it came time to actually fight off ISIS. That was an amazing story, and basically what that shows you is the military, they're not really loyal to the Shiite-led Maliki government in Iraq. So you have some Sunnis who are in the military and, you know, some Shiites who don't have an allegiance particularly to Maliki. They weren't really trained. They didn't really give a shit. So when ISIS came along, they said, yeah, fuck this. I'm not going to die for this country, which I don't even believe in, and they left. So the moment of truth came when these ISIS militants got into Kurdish-held territory. And the Kurds, for those of you who don't know, they're an ethnic minority in the north of Iraq, and they're pretty fucking organized, and they're pretty much their own country, and they want to be officially their own country, Kurdistan, and they're willing to fight these militants to protect what they view as their homeland. Well, we learned that for the first time, the Kurds actually suffered a defeat in the battle against ISIS. Now, that came as a shock to everybody in the West. I know I thought that the Kurds would actually be able to hold off ISIS because ISIS is just a ragtag group of fucking crazy terrorists who have inflated egos, and, you know, the Kurds, they're basically playing on their home court in their own land, and there's a lot of them, a lot more of them, so nobody really thought that the Kurds would not be able to hold off ISIS, but it looks as if ISIS actually is, taking some Kurdish-held territory. So shit just got weird as a result of this. Recently, ISIS took a dam in the region. It's a very important and pivotal dam in the region, and they basically pushed a religious minority group called the Yazidis. I believe they're also ethnically Kurdish, but it's a religious minority called the Yazidis up a mountain with no food and no water. I think it was like 30,000 or 40,000 of them just basically stranded on top of this mountain. So, in steps Obama, and he basically said, enough. And we're going to go ahead and pop the ISIS assholes in the face. That's what we're going to do. We're going to order in some airstrikes, and we're attacking the weaponry, okay, the weaponry and the vehicles that ISIS managed to steal from other people in the region. So I've been getting a bunch of Twitter questions about this, and people are basically saying, well, what's your take on this? Are you for it? Are you against it? Why not? So on and so forth. And here's my answer. I'm neutral on it. Now, I know that seems like a dodge, but let me explain and I'll give you my exact position. So, the reality is he did the airstrikes, and he's going to continue to do the airstrikes. He already said we're ruling out any ground troops or further ground troops. We're just going to do airstrikes real quick, and then we're out. And, look, you guys know me. I am a non-interventionist, but that doesn't mean that there's no such thing as grading interventions. Right? So sure, some are just purely for imperialistic reasons and for to continue the military-industrial complex or to rob natural resources for our corporations, and we could point to all different historical things. But every once in a while, the U.S. government does an intervention that, although there may be some military-industrial reasons why we do it and people make money off of it, it actually ends up being a rather humanitarian move. So, you know, you could look at Bosnia and Kosovo and say that's a good example of that. Or you could look at this and say, look, this is a good example of actually doing a kind of intervention that's not a horrendous kind of intervention. Now, again, to be clear, I am a non-interventionist, and I stand by the claim I always make, which is I wouldn't send American men and women to die fighting overseas unless it's to protect the homeland. I think that's basically a common sense position, that the only time that you should really use force is when there's about to be a strike against us, right? I mean, we don't see people in Greenland or Australia or elsewhere basically talking about, well, maybe we should get involved in this random place that we have nothing to do with and protect this group or that group. No, because they realize, well, what business is it of ours? And look, that's my position. So here's the bottom line. I'm neutral on this strike because I think it actually is going to be a net benefit in the region. And I think you're going to, the Iraqi government, the Shiite-led Iraqi government is happy about it. You have the Yazidis who are happy. You have the Kurds who now love the United States of America. And ISIS, there's no redeeming qualities about ISIS. They're even worse than al-qaeda. Al-qaeda disavowed them because they were killing so many innocent Muslim women and children and civilians. So that's how extreme these people are. So I'm neutral on this. I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. Now, here's the second question. What would I have done if I were president? Okay, now here's where it gets interesting. If it got to the point where ISIS flat out advanced too far and it looks like the entire area of Iraq, the entire country of Iraq, or the different regions are under threat and they're about to fall, which basically, let's be honest, it looks like that's where we are right now with ISIS, with them actually successfully beating back the Kurds a little bit and taking over a dam. And, after taking Mosul, one of the biggest cities in Iraq, it appears like we're at that point. So what do you do if you're a non-interventionist in this situation like I am? It's actually very simple. It's called NATO. What I would have done is basically the exact same thing Obama did, except here's the only difference. Instead of doing actual, getting in fighter jets and bombing, which I believe is what they did, get people. I don't want people involved because what happens if one of them has anti-aircraft missiles and an American dies fucking bombing ISIS? I don't want that to happen. I'm not going to take that risk. So what do? Well, you have you use drones and you get it authorized through NATO. So you have essentially NATO authorized droning in the area. And this way, it's not just the U.S. doing it. You basically are doing it as an international community, and you're beating back essentially what is a pure evil force and an enemy force in ISIS, and of course they're jihadists. You beat them back with the international community. Now, a lot of people would say, well, why would you even bother to go through NATO if we could just, pop, 1, 2, 3, we get it over with? And my response to that is this: precedent. Because once you set that precedent, and to be clear, this precedent has been set for a very long time anyway with the United States of America, because we've been doing it post-World War II. We think we just run the place, right? But once you set that precedent of the U.S. is a nation above nations, well, then it's a slippery slope, and it's a legitimate slippery slope to worry about that. Well, then they're just going to end up doing whatever the fuck they want, and they're always going to hide behind, well, we're just doing it for humanitarian reasons, because didn't you guys see when we did that good thing and we saved the Yazidis? Didn't you guys see when we fucked up ISIS? You all loved us then, so why don't you love us intervening in this other place? So it's a slippery slope, and that argument can be perverted, and it can be used to rationalize, toppling democratic governments and putting in dictators, as we've done in South America and Iran and elsewhere. So I wouldn't go it alone. I would do it through NATO, and I would not do the strikes with fighter jets, but I would do them with drones, because there's no people on our side and the international community side at risk if you do that. And also, I should say, absolute credit to the UN and Turkey here, because the UN and Turkey have really stepped up to the plate, and they've been doing humanitarian aid in the region for the 30,000 or 40,000 Yazidis on top of the mountain. They've been giving them supplies. So, look, when all's said and done, they did the strike. I don't think we have to worry about a much longer, essentially war in Iraq and occupation there. I mean, I would pull out the Green Berets. That's something Obama did a while back. He's sending Green Berets to train the Iraqi army. I wouldn't have done that. Because, look, the army doesn't like us, period. Right? I mean, ISIS is worse, so we think the enemy of our enemy is our friend. But not really. A lot of the Shiites that we're training are from Iran. Iran hates us. Certainly the soldiers hate us, right? A lot of the Sunnis were fighting us the last time we were in Iraq. So why are we training people who fucking hate us? Get the Green Berets out of there, man. Get them out of there right now. Okay, I wouldn't have done that. But in terms of this particular action, I'm neutral about it. I'm not happy. I'm not upset about it. But if I were to do it, if I were president, I would have went through NATO, and I would have done some drone strikes through NATO with their approval, of course, because I never like the idea of just going at it alone as a country, because that sets a horrible precedent, and I really am a true non-interventionist.